Ever tried balancing a 2-3 kilograms dumbbell on your head for hours? Now imagine doing that every single day, at every official ceremony, under the unblinking gaze of hundreds of people, while making decisions that determine the fate of an entire empire. Yeah, that's basically the job description. We've been fed the same story our whole lives about what royal power meant and what those shiny symbols of authority were really for. Historians swear crowns were just expensive decoration, gold, diamonds, heavy metal rings to symbolize wealth and divine right. But come on, let's drop the fairy tales we memorized in school. Do you honestly believe the most powerful people on Earth, who had unlimited resources, chose to physically torture themselves just for aesthetics? Or is this more like a cargo cult situation, where the original purpose was forgotten, but the form survived? What if the crown wasn't a symbol of power at all, but an advanced technical device? One that either boosted cognitive ability, or, even scarier, blocked it entirely, turning a ruler into a programmable puppet? Look at the imperial crown of Russia, or the cap of Monomaque. Ignore the museum tour hype for a second and you're left with pure engineering, a closed metal circuit made from some of the most conductive materials on the planet. Gold and silver? Not just precious metals, premium electrical conductors. The same stuff used inside the circuits of your phone or computer. So ask yourself, why place a perfectly conductive loop studded with resonator crystals like diamond, ruby, and quartz directly on the skull, right over the brain? Crystals aren't just shiny rocks either in radiotech. They're resonators, piezoelectric, wave modulating, frequency bending components. This isn't jewelry, this is a schematic. Crowns around the world share near identical design. Spikes, domes, circular bands, antenna, signal receiver, Faraday cage, brain firewall, and let's talk biology. Any spine specialist will tell you, wearing 2 kilograms on your head long term equals compressed neck vertebrae, messed up blood flow, and chronic migraines. So were monarchs masochists, or was this tech so critical that comfort became irrelevant? Look at royal portraits from the 15th to 19th century. Do those faces scream joy? Nope. More like a strange, blank detachment, like their minds were somewhere else, or maybe locked down entirely. We blame it on the weight of responsibility. But what if the weight was literal and electromagnetic? There's a theory academics mock relentlessly, yet it plugs every plot hole. A global catastrophe in the 15th century wiped out a previous high-tech civilization. The new elites found the artifacts, didn't understand the science, but noticed one thing: whoever wore these things once commanded nations. So they copied the shape, the gold, the crystals, hoping to inherit the effect. Cargo Cult 101. But there's a darker interpretation too, one backed by the bizarre illnesses and deaths of so many monarchs. What if crowns were blockers, not boosters? A golden cage for the mind. Imagine controlling the world but needing regional managers who can't think outside the box. You give them a device that suppresses willpower, dampens critical thought, maybe even streams commands straight into the brain. Suddenly, the coronation ritual makes sense. The crown wasn't placed because it was sacred, but because it was activation, authorization, network, login. As long as the connection is live, the person on the throne isn't a free agent, they're a terminal. And the facts are hiding in plain sight. The imperial crown weighed nearly 2 kilograms, the cap of Monomaque close to 1 kilogram. And that's before the mantle and scepter even enter the equation. That's not fashion. That's hardware. And again, why gold? Not steel, not wood, not leather. Why the heaviest, most conductive material available? Because maybe it was never about looking powerful. Maybe it was about being connected or being controlled. Either way, what we were told in school doesn't even scratch the surface. The official story keeps pushing the idea of cost and status, but from a physics standpoint, gold isn't about flexing. It's a truly unique metal. It doesn't oxidize, and it maintains stable conductivity. If you're building a complex device that has to function for centuries without repairs, gold is the obvious choice. If you're just crafting a fancy hat, gold is literally the worst possible option. Too soft, too heavy. Jewelers had to pull off insane engineering tricks just to keep the frame from bending under its own weight. So ask yourself, Why go through all that trouble if the only goal was to look impressive? We might be standing at the edge of a much darker revelation. The entire history of monarchy, we were taught, could turn out to be a history of technological captivity. The rulers we labeled as tyrants or visionary reformers may have been nothing more than hostages to a system they barely understood themselves. Not sovereigns, but operators locked into golden hardware, plugged into a network controlled by someone else entirely. Someone who never stood in the spotlight. Someone who actually knew what gold, resonator crystals, and electromagnetic field geometry were really for. And if we want to figure out who that was, we'll need to dig deeper into the massive population collapses textbooks, awkwardly blame on plagues or wars, even though the lost figures don't line up with reality at all. Let's drop the childish fairy tale that gemstones and crowns were just there to sparkle. Look at any technical device more advanced than a hammer, and every component serves a purpose. If the crown is an engineered system, then what role did those gemstones play? Any physicist will tell you, diamonds, rubies, sapphires aren't shiny toys. They're rigid lattice crystals capable of piezoelectric effects. Apply pressure, they generate an electrical impulse. Feed them current, they vibrate at high frequencies. In 20th century radio engineering, quartz resonators were the heart of every transmitter. You can't tune to the right frequency without them. Now look at the crowns again. Those stones weren't just glued on, they were clamped into metal mounts under constant pressure. That's not decoration. Those are activated circuit components. You're looking at a high-frequency resonant loop calibrated to specific wavebands. And yet mainstream historians want us to believe ancient jewelers spent years picking stones only for color and size. Then explain this: why do surviving historical records so often mention crowns humming or glowing in the dark? We're told it's poetic metaphor, but what if it's a description of an active device running? The gold or high-grade silver frame acted like a waveguide. The arches converging at the top looked like something straight out of antenna array or magnetron diagrams. The cross on the crown's peak, that's a textbook dipole antenna receiver or transmitter. The whole structure is built to concentrate an electromagnetic field into one single point. And that point is the pineal gland, buried deep inside the human brain. Biologists say the pineal gland regulates sleep cycles, but alternative researchers argue it's an interface to external information fields. And now a detail we were trained to ignore: the lining. Almost every crown had an inner cap of velvet or dense fabric. Museums claim it was just for comfort, to stop metal from rubbing the skin. Seriously? You forge a symbol of power worth the GDP of a small country, then throw in a piece of cloth just to keep it comfy? In electrical engineering, that lining is an insulator, a dielectric layer. Because if you put a bare, high-voltage conductive loop on a sweaty human scalp, you're not crowning a king, you're frying a brain or killing a man. The insulation was for operator safety. Which raises another question: why do all museums only show crowns from the 15th to 19th centuries? Where are the older ones? Melted down, stolen, lost, convenient? Almost like the actual functioning units were confiscated. The crowns in the Hermitage or the Tower of London, probably replicas made by craftsmen copying the shape without understanding the function. They swapped resonator crystals for glass, used low conductivity alloys, botched the field geometry. And that's why modern monarchs look like people in costumes instead of system terminals capable of commanding nations. The magic vanished because the technology was removed. And don't even get me started on the orb, the golden sphere topped with a cross. Historians mumble about it being a symbol of the globe, even though globes became common long after the orb already existed. Look at it like an engineer, a conductive sphere with an antenna. That's not Earth symbolism. That's a charge storage capacitor or a component of a Van de Graaff generator. Together with the scepter and crown, it formed a closed circuit. The scepter as a grounding or directional electrode, the orb as a power source or static charge accumulator, and the crown as a resonator and neural interface. A tsar in full regalia wasn't just a guy in a fancy outfit, he was the living, breathing jumper cable in a massive energy system. Why has that idea been buried so deep? Because admitting power came from technology, not heaven, would crack the foundation of modern civilization. If it turns out authority wasn't granted by God but by hardware, every royal dynasty's legitimacy evaporates instantly. And that opens an even bigger question. Who built the hardware? What advanced civilization handed our ancestors population control devices like remote consoles? And where did those architects of power disappear to? Now look at coronation paintings. Massive halls, cathedral acoustics, sky-high vaulted ceilings. Funny thing, cathedrals aren't just religious monuments. They're giant resonators built on wave physics, not scripture. Pipe organs, bells, those were frequency generators. And there in the center of that acoustic pressure cooker stands a human being while they place a metal receiver on his head. The sound waves hit the crown's crystals, resonance kicks in, and piezoelectric conversion turns audio into electrical charge. Boom, the field goes live, the operator slips into an altered state. The crowd wasn't trembling because it was holy. They were reacting to electromagnetic radiation messing with their nervous systems. That wasn't mysticism, that was population-scale mind-influenced tech running on physics we're only now rediscovering. But somewhere in the 19th century, the signal died. A glitch. Or maybe the original engineers simply walked away, leaving humanity staring at a pile of unplugged hardware. That era shows sudden demographic spikes, waves of orphans, bizarre city fires conveniently wiping out archives. The rewrite began. Technical terminology was swapped for theology. Ether became a forbidden word in science, even though Mendeleev originally placed it in his table. Conductivity, resonance, neural field effects dismissed as heresy or quietly forgotten. The only thing left was the crown as a husk. Heavy, pointless, ceremonial cosplay passed down by inertia. But the scariest clues are in the timelines. Scan the lifespan of monarchs from the last 300 years and the numbers are wild. A huge percentage suffered neurological breakdowns, seizures, migraines, what they used to call melancholia, what we diagnose today as severe depression or something far worse. The establishment loves to blame cousin marriages and genetic decline. But what if the real cause was occupational hazard? What if these people were exposed to long-term high-frequency EM fields that rewired or fried neural circuitry? Think about the madness of King George, or the bizarre fits across the Romanov line. That's not divine burden. That's clinical textbook brain exposure to high-frequency fields. They weren't wearing crowns, they were wearing reactors. And the insulation layer? Velvet lining wasn't for comfort, it was a dielectric safety barrier. Without it, the wearer would have been electrocuted or neurologically cooked alive. Then there's the manufacturing plot hole. We're told the imperial crown was made in just 2 months. Let that sink in. 5,000 precision-matched diamonds, 75 pearls, complex conductive metal architecture in 60 days. Try ordering something like that today, even with microscopes, CAD modeling, lasers, and electricity. Any jeweler would laugh you out of the room. In the 15th century, by candlelight, hand tools, no magnification, physically impossible. To set 5,000 stones in 60 days, you'd need non-stop 24/7 labor, placing one stone every 15 minutes with 0 breaks. And that's not even counting cutting, polishing, or forging the frame. So which part is the lie, the timeline, or the tech? Probably both. The simplest explanation? These were inherited systems, industrial artifacts from a wiped civilization swallowed by historical amnesia. And that brings us to the creepiest myth of them all, blue blood. We treat it like poetic aristocratic branding, but chemically speaking, human blood is red because of iron-based hemoglobin. But copper-based blood exists too, hemocyanin, and yeah, it actually looks bluish. It shows up in mollusks and arthropods. So what if blue blood wasn't metaphor? What if it was literal biology interacting with conductive tech, our ancestors plugged directly into their nervous systems? But the real story isn't about color, it's about conductivity. Copper is a far more efficient electrical conductor than iron. So what if the ancient ruling elite, the so-called gods or titans, literally had a different blood chemistry that let them interface with these energy devices without frying their own nervous systems? For them, the crown wasn't a foreign object. It was basically an extension of their neural system. Then, regular humans took over red-blooded or diluted descendants who no longer carried the copper-based blood gene, and the same devices became lethal cosplay instead of power tools. They wore them to imitate gods, but instead of a cognitive boost, they got radiation sickness, neurological collapse, insanity, and early death. Maybe that's the real explanation for the fall of monarchy, not genetics, not cousin marriages, but straight up biological incompatibility with crown technology. Think about it. Now look at palaces, the places where these crowns were stored and used. Throne rooms weren't bedrooms. They were machine chambers. Giant mirrors, crystal chandeliers, gold leaf, marble floors, no kitchens, no bathrooms, but insanely tall ceilings and bizarre geometric layouts. That's not interior design. That's signal amplification architecture. Mirrors and crystal? Basically an old school laser and reflector array. The throne was the operator's seat, the crown was the receiver, the entire palace was the circuit board, and the human was just one component in the system. Then, somewhere around the mid-19th century, the system went dark. The breaker flipped. Something happened, a great reset. The flood, the clay rain, whatever you want to call it, and the atmosphere stopped carrying free ambient energy the way it used to. Ether thinned out or its parameters changed, and the whole global network turned into unplugged junk. Palaces became cold museums, crowns became dead weight, monarchs became confused cosplayers playing roles they no longer controlled. And weirdly, right at that moment, the mid-1800s, we see an unexplained population explosion. Humanity too, mass-produced and respawned, running on fossil fuel tech instead of atmospheric energy. While the old rulers became stage props for the illusion of continuity. They knew the truth. They knew they were imposters wearing dead devices from a dead world. That's why empires collapsed so cleanly in the early 20th century scheduled demolition of scenery that was no longer needed by whoever actually ran the planet from the shadows. The crime scene can't be erased. It's still in the metal, the stone, and the numbers that don't add up. The answer sits in the realm of energy. That civilization was too free. You couldn't control it through fear or resource scarcity. When you have unlimited energy and a direct link to the noosphere, you don't need banks, borders, or governments. Nobody can force you to work just to eat. To build the pyramid-shaped power structure we see today, humanity first had to be pushed down to pure survival mode. An artificial shortage had to be engineered, the real technologies destroyed, ether physics erased from memory, and most importantly, the working mental crown interfaces swapped out for heavy gold dummies that now serve only as symbols of oppression. Look at the dates of major discoveries and revolutions. Almost all of them suspiciously line up with mass archive destruction events. The Fire of Moscow in 1812, the Library of Congress burning, the waves of fires across European capitals. The target wasn't the buildings, it was the evidence of what the world looked like before the reset. We were convinced we were evolving, when in reality, we were being rolled back. We brag about smartphones, but can't replicate the stonework of polygonal walls. We treat the common cold, but die from cancer. The tsars were the first casualties of this new reality. Their heads were wrapped in gold, not to grant power, but to isolate them, a blockade. The golden helmet muted what was left of their intuition, the fading remnants of that ancient connection that might have still flickered in their genes. The system that seized the world feared one thing, a monarch waking up and remembering. So the rituals got more complicated, the crowns got heavier, and the protocol got tighter. They turned rulers into organic rubber stamps bio-robots, built to sign decrees and absorb public outrage like lightning rods. And now we hit the biggest question of the 21st century. Why did the topic of Tartaria and alternative history explode so suddenly? Why are millions of people now noticing buried floors and impossible architecture? Because the mental lockdown is weakening. The planet's frequency is shifting, even official instruments track it, like the Schumann resonance. The cage around the human mind is cracking. The old control tools are failing, and the people behind the curtain, the architects who put chains on the heads of kings, are now scrambling to stage a new reset. They can feel it. We're starting to remember. Those heavy metal crowns were just prototypes, beta tests of mind control tech, trial run on the elite. The so-called global predictors realized early on that physical chains are expensive and inefficient. The real prison has to be built inside the mind. The gold ring didn't vanish. It evolved, shrank, and turned invisible. Look around today. We're being nudged to implant chips, wear neural devices, carry pocket communication hubs 24/7. You think it's progress? No, it's the final stage of a plan that started with the forging of the first imperial crown. The wrapper changed, the mechanism stayed the same. Plug a biological unit into a unified digital matrix that governs thoughts, emotions, and behavior. The old rulers suffered headaches because the tech was crude. We suffer panic attacks, ADHD, burnout, and chronic fatigue because the signal became subtle but global. We carry our crowns in our pockets now, convinced we're in control, unaware we're just participants in a digital cargo cult. We've become inmates of a system we mistake for innovation, worshiping a network we never built and barely understand.